Live NFL trivia every Wednesday night on Twitch at 9 p.m. Eastern. Come show off your football knowledge for a chance to win cash prizes. Check the link in the description to find out more. And now, on with our feature presentation. When fans try and build a Mount Rushmore of the greatest players in the history of the Cleveland Browns, usually 99% of fans can agree on 3 of the 4. Yes, there are some heated and spirited debates over the 4th spot, which comes down to guys like Ozzie Newsome, Paul Warfield, and Joe Thomas. But the first 3 are usually undisputed. You have arguably the greatest runner in the history of professional football in Jim Brown, who won the rushing title all but 1 year that he played. You have Otto Graham, the revolutionary quarterback who led the Browns to a dynasty in their early days of the All-America Football Conference. And then, you have this guy. You have Lou the Toe Groza. Groza is synonymous with the Browns, and he never really stopped playing. By the time his career with the Browns started in 1946, the Browns were a brand new team playing their first season ever. By the time his career ended with the Browns in 1967, we were already in the Super Bowl era. His career was that long and that impressive. But it almost came to an end in 1964, when his job was in serious jeopardy. And in the span of one practice, he saved his career from what seemed on the surface like surefire extinction. This is the story behind the moment that saved Lou Groza's incredible career. Before I talk about the moment in question, we need some context to understand just who Lou Groza is, how much he meant to the team, and how well he was playing before that 1964 campaign. Groza was an Ironman who was a very solid offensive lineman, starting on some of the top offenses in the NFL at the time. He was the starting left tackle when Jim Brown won his rushing titles in the 1950s, and from 1951 to 59, never missed a single start. When you play on the offensive line and you start over 100 straight games, that's awfully impressive. However, besides playing on the offensive line, he was known mainly for something else, and that was his impressive leg and his kicking abilities. Groza played both ways, serving as the team's kicker during this time as well. And let's just say that they didn't call him the Toe for nothing, because Groza was one of the best kickers in football throughout the 1950s. He led the AAFC in field goals made in 1946, then in the NFL, led the league in this category in 1950, 1952, 1953, 1954, and 1957. For those curious, he is the only kicker in the over 100-year history of the NFL to lead the league in field goals made 5 times. He stands alone. He also led the league in field goal percentage 5 times, with 3 of those seasons coming in the 1950s. Much like the last stat, he is also the only kicker in NFL history to lead the league in field goal percentage 5 times. During the 1950s, Groza made it to the Pro Bowl 9 times, and was named the first team All-Pro 4 straight times from 1952 to 55. He was named a member of the All-1950s team as well, although it should be noted that this was retroactive, as that team was only voted on in 1969. Groza retired after 1959 because of a back injury. However, when he came back in 1961, he showed no signs of slowing down, as during the 1961 season, he led the league by hitting over 69.6% of his field goals. And while his percentage dipped a bit in 1962, he still finished the season 3rd in the league in field goals made. Groza was an incredible player whose legacy was already cemented. He was a 7-time champion at the time, and was an instrumental part in the success that the Browns had during this entire period, where they were one of the league's most formidable opponents on a year-to-year basis. You would think that in 1963, at the age of 39 years old, he would finally succumb to Father Time. Instead, he played some of the best football of his career. The idea of an NFL player, even if it is a kicker, playing until he's 40 is somewhat crazy to think about, even if we are seeing it a bit more often now thanks to advances in medicine and health and fitness programs. But back in 1963, something like this was almost unheard of. For some perspective, from 1948 to 62, there was a grand total of 1 player in the NFL who played past the age of 38. So for a player to play at this age, let alone play at a high level, seemed to defy all logic. But that's what makes Lou Groza so great, because in 1963, he was as good as ever. During the 1963 season, Groza hit 65.2% of his field goals. That was the top percentage in the entire league. We have to contextualize this number a bit, because obviously today, hitting just over 65% of your field goals is going to get you cut 10 times out of 10. But back in 1963, this was an incredible percentage. Of the 14 qualified kickers in the NFL that season, 7 of them could not hit more than 50% of their kicks. No, Groza didn't have the strongest leg by this point. He was 0 for 3 on field goals from 50-plus yards, and was the only starting kicker in the league to not hit a field goal of at least 45 yards. But he was remarkably accurate in short and mid-range situations. Case in point, let's look at every kick he had from inside of 40 yards that season. On kicks from inside 40, he went 11 for 13, hitting on 84.6% of his attempts. That was miles ahead of the rest of the league. Of all the qualified kickers in football, which happened to be every kicker to attempt at least 10 kicks from inside 40 yards, none of them besides Groza hit more than 75% of their kicks from this range, with a ton of them hovering around the 60% mark. 4 of them weren't even above the 50% mark. And yet, here was Groza, who was pretty much automatic, especially for that era. Groza had a season to remember in 1963, and it didn't look like he was going to slow down in 1964 once he officially hit his 40s. But during the offseason, the Browns seemed to have other ideas. In the 1964 NFL Draft, there were 280 players selected over 20 rounds, and you would think that some of these teams would have invested in kickers. Again, you had half the league who was trotting a kicker out there that was not hitting more than 50% of his kicks, and you had teams like the San Francisco 49ers who had a kicker, in this case Tommy Davis, who was hitting just 32% of his field goal attempts. Yet of the 280 players taken in the draft, only one kicker was taken. Only one team decided to spend one of their draft picks on this special teams position. And that team, to what seemed like the surprise of everyone, was none other than the Cleveland Browns. Groza was coming off of a season where he led the league in field goal percentage, and now the Browns were trying to replace him. In the 10th round, with pick number 138, the team drafted a kicker out of Ohio State named Dick Van Raphorst. I'm going to keep showing highlights of Groza throughout all this, because number 1, Van Raphorst's clips are hard to find, and number 2, Groza is just awesome, and I like watching him kick. And Van Raphorst was a really solid kicker with the Buckeyes during the 1963 collegiate season. He started the year off hitting his first 6 field goals, and while he cooled down a bit as the year went on, he finished going 8 for 13, hitting on over 61% of his kicks. Only 3 kickers during 1963 in the NFL hit on more than 57% of their kicks, so for any kicker to be hitting on at least 3/5 of their field goals was really good back then. And Van Raphorst had what Groza didn't at that point, and that was a strong leg. Remember what I said about Groza not hitting a single kick from 44 plus yards in 1963, being the only starting kicker in the NFL to not do this? Van Raphorst hit 4 of these in 1963 alone. In fact, on kicks from 44 plus yards, he was 4 for 4. Cleveland drafted an accurate kicker who had a cannon of a leg compared to that of Lou Groza. The writing seemed to be on the wall. At the very least, there was competition for this starting job. Groza's years of success with the team and field goal percentage title in 1963 meant nothing heading into 1964. There seemed to be a new sheriff in town, and Groza's career with the Browns seemed like it was coming to an end. That was until one practice changed everything, and Groza showed everyone, including Van Raphorst, who the boss was. To add another layer to this story, Groza and Van Raphorst were pretty close prior to Van Raphorst ever getting drafted by the Browns. Van Raphorst grew up in Cleveland in the suburbs, and actually lived across the street from Groza at one point. When Van Raphorst was in high school, Groza was his tutor. Now the student was competing against his master for the coveted kicking job. And there was speculation that this wasn't exactly Groza's job to lose. This was not a situation where a team signs a kicker just as an additional camp body or for a fake competition. The Browns were high on Van Raphorst. You don't draft the best kicker in college football and take the only kicker off the board if you aren't serious about possibly making a change at that position. On the first day of camp, Groza and Van Raphorst were getting ready to warm up and kick. Usually with something like this, you would start off from a shorter distance, like the 20-yard line, and then work your way back, warm your leg up. But Groza decided to get the ball rolling by telling Van Raphorst, "Let's begin at the 40. When Groza went back to kick, he drilled it through the uprights. Then, Groza decided for his next kick to move it to the 45-yard line, where again, he did not make a kick in all of 1963 combined. And sure enough, Groza drilled that one too. In his first 2 kicks in practice, Groza was perfect, and hit from 40 plus yards both times. Those who were there and recalled the event said at that moment, Van Raphorst was broken mentally. You could see it. He knew at that moment that he was not going to beat out Lou Groza, that Groza still had it, and that he was not going to win this job or stay in Cleveland long. After just 2 kicks in practice, Groza showed the Browns the mistake they made. A few weeks later, the Browns made it official by getting rid of Van Raphorst, trading him to the Dallas Cowboys for a draft pick. Once again, for the 18th season, they were going to roll with Lou Groza as their starting kicker. As Groza said on the move, "I feel good this year, and will play as long as I can. I never work on the principle of leaving. I'll probably be around until they sweep me out." At this point, Groza was stat padding, as he was already the all-time leading scorer in NFL history, and held 7 other league records as well. But he was going to continue his time with the Browns for at least another year. In his fiercest competition yet, he fended it off after just 2 practice kicks. And unsurprisingly, he showed the Browns that at the end of the day, they made the right decision. Let's start with Dick Van Raphorst and see what he did with his career in pro football. I'm still going to show highlights of Lou Groza for this part because, again, it's fun to watch him kick. And I'm not sure how many chances I'm going to get to showcase just how good of a player he was. Van Raphorst only played one season with the Cowboys, and he hit just over 48% of his kicks. Of the 14 qualified kickers in football that season, he finished 10th in field goal percentage. Van Raphorst played 2 seasons with the San Diego Chargers, and while he made the All-Star game in 1966 by hitting just over 50% of his kicks, he was out of pro football by the end of the 1967 season. As for Lou Groza, while Father Time would eventually get to him, it wouldn't be in 1964, when he actually improved on his field goal percentage from the year before, and hit 66.7% of his kicks, which was the second best percentage in the league. As Meatloaf once said, 2 out of 3 ain't bad, especially when we're talking about field goal percentage in the mid-60s. He had another great season in 1965 when he hit 64% of his kicks, finishing 4th in this category. Groza had an unbelievable 14 seasons where he finished inside the top 5 of his respective league in field goal percentage, and this was the 14th and final one of them, which came at the age of 41. Finally, after the 1967 season, Groza retired, finishing his career with over 1,600 points scored. At the time of his retirement, only one other player even had 1,000. Obviously, if Groza lost his starting job in 1964 and somehow never played again afterwards, nothing with his legacy changes. He would still be in the Hall of Fame, he would still be one of the greatest scorers in the history of the sport, and he would still be a Cleveland Browns and an NFL legend. But even with the hundreds of games that Groza played in, and all the memorable performances along the way, the story that might best exemplify just how good he was in the league was a practice, with his replacement waiting in the wings. On the very first day, in the matter of 2 kicks, he got rid of him. A lot of players slow down at the age of 40, but for Lou Groza, on this day, he was just getting started. Get your official Jaguar Gamer 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot, and be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL Trivia and win cash prizes, link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at JaguarGator9, and subscribe to 60-Second NFL History on YouTube. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.